everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Pickle. My name is Juan Francisco Muñoz, and I'm joined as always by my colleague Ronald Wordsworth. How are you, Ronald?
Very good, Juanfrey. How are you doing? Ready for Christmas?
I don't know. I still need to buy all the food and everything, and I still have some gifts missing. So,
Me too, don't worry.
Have you bought your gifts?
Oh, this is way too early. 2 weeks, that's plenty of time still.
Well, it's still plenty of time. Well, this is the Christmas episode. And for that, we welcome Christopher Strong. How are you, Chris?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
You have probably seen Chris in our socials if you follow us. So if you don't, follow us there. And he's the geopolitical analysis lead of the Pickle Gazette, which is our newsletter that we release bi-weekly. So if you haven't signed up, there's the link in the description and you can go for it. And again, this is the Christmas special. So today we're going to do something it's a new format. We're going to explore
different
today.
to normal.
It's a bit different, yeah.
A bit more lighthearted, maybe
some singing.
Maybe some singing if
Christmas
it comes.
carols.
Yeah, some Christmas carols at the end. Maybe, I don't know if it triggers your singing. Because what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be bringing things that have happened in 2024. And we're just going to comment on them. Some many are related to geopolitics, obviously, or international politics, because this is what we do. But some of them are not necessarily geopolitics, but are still interesting. So, like, if I don't know, things that we didn't realize that happened this year, for example, or that we forgot that happened this year. So yeah, this is a special format. We hope you enjoy it, and now we go with it, and we're gonna start with January. So, guys, in January 1st, Ethiopia appeared to be willing to recognize Somaliland as a country, which would have made it the first country in the world to recognize, in exchange for a deal to lease part of the coastal waters to the latter. Actually, in a conference that we were recently, we discussed this about Ethiopia recognizing Somaliland, Ronan. So I don't know, what's your take in that? Do you think that would actually happen? Because it fell down a little bit throughout the year.
Well, I think, it released a whole host of different geopolitical implications as a direct result of this decision. And I would stress that it's never been confirmed that they would recognize. That was just speculated to be the agreement with Somaliland. But we see Somalia, as a result of that, pull away from Ethiopia, try and remove Ethiopian troops from Somalia, which is around 10,000 troops, at the same time as Al-Shabaab are being highly resurgent and are probably their strongest since their inception. They basically say they think there's around 12,000 Al-Shabaab troops now. And so at this exact moment where the African Union mission was finishing, they were also trying to remove the Ethiopian troops as a direct result of this, what they call a violation of their sovereignty. And then we've seen Somalia turn towards Egypt as a potential partner for security, which is the first time in 4 decades that Egypt has been interested or involved in Somalia. And we might even say that is a consequence of their ongoing dispute with Ethiopia over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is upstream of the Nile. Nile, obviously, vitally important for Egypt's national security and national interest, supplying 95% of their clean water, or 98%, sorry, and 95% of the residents live within the catchment area of the Nile Delta. So, you can see how important it is for them, and that has maybe motivated their involvement on the side of Somalia. And we've seen this all kind of play out throughout the year with different moves, a bit like a chessboard, I would say. And Turkey trying to be this mediating force because they have a heavy presence around the Horn of Africa. And just in the recent weeks, we've seen some development there where Turkey has basically brokered a deal between Ethiopia and Somalia. I think part of this is because Somalian central government is so weak at the moment. Not only is Somaliland a breakaway region from Somalia, but we also have in the south Jubaland, which has now gone into conflict with the central government. We've got Puntland in the north, and as I said, resurgent Al-Shabaab. So Somalia and Mogadishu, very, very weak, and that's kind of why it's played out like this. As for recognition, I even heard the ex-British foreign minister from under David Cameron saying that he thinks that Trump will recognize Somaliland.
Somaliland.
I don't necessarily know what stock to put in that. I don't think Trump really cares too much about Somaliland as a strategic priority. But if he was to say recognize, the UK would do it almost immediately. They don't want to, being the former colonial power of Somaliland region in particular, to be the first country to do it. But I think it could set off a chain reaction in the same way that even potentially formal recognition by Ethiopia could set off some sort of chain reaction of recognitions. But I think for now it's kind of simmered. Obviously, this new deal in Turkey, but the relationship between Somalia and Ethiopia is definitely damaged. And Egypt has been the one driving this wedge and trying to create a new regional bloc with Eritrea and Somalia against Ethiopia, I would say.
Well, that was a really thorough explanation from Ronan. Maybe the next things are not going to be that thoroughly explained because this was not today's point. But Ronan has been writing articles actually about Somaliland recently and the region of the Horn. So the Horn of Africa. So yeah, he definitely wanted to let it out of his chest. So we're gonna go with something that happened on 11th January. That was that South Africa began the case in the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. This has developed later in the year, and actually by end of November there was an arrest warrant issued against Netanyahu, former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, and the leader of some leaders of Hamas.
Most of who are dead or presumed dead.
Yes, most of whom Israel says that they killed them. So what is your take in this? Because it's been really controversial in the sense that there's many countries that are not signatories of the ICJ. Among them, Israel, the United States, Russia. So like countries that you tend to have problems with the ICJ are not signatory to the ICJ. So what do you think, Chris? Do you think this development, what do you think is the validity of the ICJ, given that these states are not part of it and like technically they cannot be judged unless the people that are judged step on the land of countries that are signatories of it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say that it is valid, but from the U.S. perspective, obviously, they're not signatories, so they do not care. The U.S. government does not care for the most part. On the same side, on the other side of the coin, it matters because it makes the U.S. look worse, that we're supporting someone that has an international arrest warrant on the ICJ. And I'm sure we also turn around and point to Putin's arrest warrant when we talk about things that Russia's doing wrong. So then it makes us look like hypocrites, makes the U.S. government look like hypocrites. So that's problematic. But I would say moving into the new year, especially with this new administration that we're going to see, I don't think that this is going to have any bearing on U.S. policy moving forward. It didn't have much bearing on
Biden.
Biden, and it certainly is not going to have any bearing on a Trump administration.
No, definitely. And actually, it's what I can add also here is that there are certain states that, although they are signatories, now they say that they won't enforce the arrest warrant. France was the first one giving that step. I think Germany has done something similar. Actually, France accepted the ruling and then some days later backed off. For me, it's a threat to the international rules-based system, actually. It's like properly... in the international rules-based system, there's a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of things that are not working properly and that can be improved, for sure. We've seen it with Ukraine. We've seen it now with Palestine. We've seen it in Sudan. But it's worked in many other cases. Like, for example, the ICJ worked pretty well with the end of the Yugoslav wars and holding people accountable there and so on. So I think an outright like if countries like the United States or don't accept the ruling of the ICJ on matters that affect not even them, because this is not even the United States, but it's their interests in the Middle East, we cannot really expect other countries to.
But I mean, I would say this isn't new necessarily. I think many countries in the global south have long accused the ICJ of being a court to prosecute poorer nations. I think that has some validity for sure. And it's kind of a bit of a political instrument as well. If we see the US is obviously not a signatory, was very vocal in the support for the ICJ arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, and then have basically said that this is unenforceable, that Netanyahu has done nothing wrong, etc. But then even from the other side of the coin, when we look at South Africa, the country that brought the case to the ICJ, they're obviously in BRICS with Russia, as we said. Last year's BRICS summit was in South Africa. Putin didn't attend, but the president gave him assurances that if they did, they wouldn't arrest him, even though they are a signatory to the ICJ. Mm-hmm. So there's even a double standards from that respect, that they're willing to let the decision pass when it's on Russia, but not when it's on Israel. So I think all of these things are contradictory in the international system anyway. I don't think this is a new phenomenon to see like these ideological divisions and probably lack of function of these basic international systems to be applied to anyone but poorer states that basically get left behind by the rest of the global system and have the rules imposed on them. But it's kind of a two-speed system, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that since these are systems that are put, I mean, we're not going to disclose anything here. I mean, these are systems that were basically created in a time of Cold War and led by the West, basically. So that's why I think that it's not that unexpected. I mean, it's not that unexpected at this point. There's been many rulings of the ICJ against the United States, for example, in the beginning with the Afghanistan war and stuff like this, that they weren't applied. But yeah, I just think that little by little it brings us down and until a point where it will just like be not useful at all, and that is that will open the way for other things. But let's go for the next topic, okay? Because as we said, we don't want to get too deep into any topic. This is a little bit more. This is a special episode. So on the 23rd of January, gentlemen,
You're still in January.
You are still in January. Hey, this one is fun. The doomsday clock remains set at 90 seconds to midnight by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, citing threat of nuclear arms race, the Ukraine war, and climate change. You know, the interesting thing about this is that Elon Musk is happy for this because we are only 30 seconds to Mars. Yes, I wanted to drop this joke here. Man. There you go.
Excellent.
Very good.
So, yeah, I mean, the doomsday clock is something that I remember when I was a kid, I followed it a lot. I was like, oh my God, it's like 90 seconds, it's like 60 seconds, whatever. But in the end, yeah, it's just a way of measuring how close we are of annihilating humanity as a whole.
Through nuclear war.
Through nuclear war, and hopefully they're not right. 30 seconds, 90 seconds doesn't seem too much. Again, we can still make it to Mars. On the 24th of January still, the UK confirmed a 3-year loan of Ghana's crown jewels belonging to the Asante monarch to the Mahinja Palace Museum in Kumasi, 150 years after they were looted. I put this here is because this opened a topic this year about returning, decolonizing museums, particularly in Europe. And it's opened a debate at a diplomatic level because of the importance that these objects and relics have in their original countries. And what do you guys think about this? Like, both of you are from countries that are like, us three are from countries of white people. But particularly your two states did not necessarily go somewhere else to take the
Whereas your country did.
Whereas my country did. I mean, to be fair, we are not the British Museum, but we did our fair bit.
No, I was going to say about the British Museum. That's where I'd like to start. But I mean, obviously this had a ripple effect in a lot of French colonies with countries like Benin asking for some of the Benin gold statues back and things like this. It's a complicated issue from my perspective. I think, obviously, the way that colonialism was done was very exploitative of indigenous populations across the world. However, as you said, British Museum has a huge collection of foreign goods. There wouldn't be much there if it wasn't for their...
Yeah.
But I mean,
if you want to see Middle Eastern art, go to the British.
But I mean, also, I think this is the problem that we get into by just saying we can return everything. Is like there's also a history of it being transported to the UK, to France, through that colonial period. And I think we can't just say either way, okay, we should return everything or forget it. I think it's a complex situation where there is valid arguments on both sides. I think, like for some of these things, as they've been in the UK for longer than anyone has been alive that's on the planet today. So there is this new history of these objects there. But I mean, that's not even to go into the fact that some of the countries are maybe more authoritarian and do not have the infrastructure to protect these potential treasured relics and things like this that the British Museum does. The catalogue, the effort that's made in keeping and restoring these priceless pieces might not be done the same way in, say, Mali, where we have an authoritarian military regime that I don't think is cares too much about preserving these historical artifacts, more about the image that they can send by claiming that they want them. So that's.
Do you think we live in a time where we can make 3D prints of these things in the European museums? Like, when I think about it, sometimes as a Spanish, like for example, there's some stuff from the Americas that is in Spanish museums, and like it's gold, relics, whatever. It's not an excessive number, but there are stuff still there, and every time I think about it, I'm like, okay, like, you have replicas of things everywhere, and like you can return it. Like, for example, in this case with the former American colonies of Spain, you can really return the things. I mean, these countries can definitely take care of this. We want to, like, it's still part of our history. It's still part of our history that is arrived. It's part of whatever. We can have copies, or we can have like collections that come to Spain to show it, whatever. Like, I don't think there's that need for a fight especially when countries already have the capacities to have these things exposed, and it's also their history. Like, what I feel is like if we keep it in Europe, in some European museum, you're stealing them from part of their history, because although it's part of yours, it's part of theirs too. And like, by keeping it at your museum only, you're disallowing them from having their part, like, I don't know. I mean, in the end, it's a cultural thing. It's one of in the end, it will go to the pure theoretical aspect of like creating your own identity as a nation and so on. These objects clearly have that identity. And if they even have more identity if they were stolen and then retrieved. They probably have more identity than if they stayed in the country in itself, because it's a victory of your nation
over former colonial power.
But I mean, it's not just that. Like, we're not even talking about colonial powers. Like, we're talking about the British Museum has parts of the Parthenon from Athens.
Yeah.
and they won't give it back.
Or the Louvre, or the Louvre, they have Mona Lisa, which is Italian. Like, it's I mean, there are all these aspects. Although it opens, I also understand that it opens the debate on like art, for example, European art that is in different states. It opens a big debate. Anyways,
kind of similar to, we don't want to recognize one state, because then we open a whole Pandora's box and we recognize this, we recognize this. If we give one art piece back,
is it opening us up to the same claims from many other countries in the future?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it is interesting. That's something for me to look after next year. Let's see how it develops. Okay, two news from February. There's many more, actually, but I'm narrowing down. So, in February 15th, Germany became the world's third largest economy after Japan, which slipped into recession. Which is interesting, because if I'm not wrong, that at the end of this year, Germany is not the third largest economy, because the German economy is stagnating, and it's got really big problems. With this, actually, my comment on this is always the same. California is a bigger economy than Germany. Which is crazy. We're talking about Germany and Japan, which are two countries with a massive industrial output. Again, third and fourth largest economies in the world.
I would say, like, on the two, Germany and Japan, something to look out for, and something that's already undergoing now, is the role that demographics has in the economy stagnating. Yes. I think if we look at a lot of Western developed countries, I mean, even Japan and South Korea, the worst two examples, but all of Europe has the same problem with low birth rates. So you have a smaller working group of the population compared to the retired age people. And I think this is a trend which is accelerating in some countries. Even China has horrible demographics. I think that if we look not just now, but 15, 20, 30, 50 years in the future, we're going to see these demographic issues really start to hit economies and really build up this stagnation, unless that could be countered by more industrialization, I guess 3.0 or 4.0, I guess it's called now, with AI and robotics and things like this,
and reduction of
reduction of labor. Exactly.
Japan, for example, for the first time in their history, they reduced the labor week, the working week, to 4 days. Literally because people were not having kids. I mean, I've heard really crazy stories about people in Japan working 16 hours, falling asleep in the train, falling asleep in the metro stations, whatever. Like you see Suda people.
I think this is as kind of a symptom of like hyper capitalization of societies where people are treated more like commodities and then able to just give an output. And at the end result of that is, as you say, people are not having kids, low birth rates, and then the base of potential employees shrinks over time. So I think some sort of adjustment of that is likely a rethinking of the demographic problem for Western powers, I mean, and Russia, especially after their war.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, well, you just mentioned Russia, so we're going to go 16th February. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny dies in prison, claimed to be killed in prison. Which after Prigozhin, also the former leader of the Wagner group, also died in a plane. Well, basically his plane got hit. His plane was shot down. Basically leaves Russia without visible opposition figures, at least that we can see clear as these two people were. What is your take on that, Chris, since you are more in the Russian sphere?
Well, my take on that is that it's not surprising, and I would say it's following the general trend of where Russia is heading. Putin has consolidated power over the years, stamped out opposition. Murdered opposition figures on a bridge right in front of the Kremlin. So I think that. Maybe there's still some question of what exactly caused Navalny's death, but the immediate thing that caused it. But obviously his imprisonment, being poisoned, all these things added up and caused him to die. So I'm not particularly surprised by that. And I think if you're any opposition in Russia, you should be worried. And I don't think there's much concerted.
There's a message also, like any other.
For me, I think the one thing that tells us is that Putin himself must feel quite weak, that he needs to take out these potential threats to his regime, because obviously the war has not been going how Russia wants for 2.5 years now. The opposition to his rule is there in Russia, but people are not allowed to speak it out in the open, and you sort of need this unifying figure against him to round up support, which is why he's taken the step of eliminating these threats, I think. And so I think really he probably, he's an old KGB man himself. He must know that there would be some undercurrent of unhappiness within the establishment there about the ongoing nature of this war. Many oligarchs have lost a lot of money in this war. And for what is what I would say. So I think that's one major takeaway for me from Navalny's murder, I would call it, even if it's indirect, it's still...
Yeah, indirectly, but still, even if it is.
Okay, well, from Russia, we're going to go to France in a topic that, for me, it's pretty important, I think, and it sets a stepping stone for society as a whole. France is the first country in 4th of March in the world to enshrine the access to abortion in the Constitution, voting in an amendment, which basically it's enshrined in the Constitution. Therefore, it's a constitutional right for French women to go through abortion by their own decision. And this is something that, for example, with the cases that we had last year in the United States, I think it was last year or the previous year with the Wade versus Roe,
Roe versus Wade,
Roe versus Wade case. In Poland, also there was a big pushback against abortion rights with the previous government. That's now changed slightly, but it's there hanging. So I think it's something really, really interesting, and it's a way to make sure that some social rights, some personal individual rights are there, set in stone, and that you will have to change the constitution, because this opens the sphere for like marriage rights or social rights in general that it has not been explored before, and I thought it was pretty interesting to mention. I don't know, like I know that in the US it's a super complex topic, because you have like the federal law, then you have the state law, then you have even lower set of laws that are like you get the decision of. How do you see like something that is enshrined like in the Constitution in itself for that, Chris?
I think it's a good thing. I mean, we should always ensure women's right to choose, and I wish in the United States that we would do the same thing. But obviously, it's a very contentious issue in the U.S. And I think moving forward in the U.S., we're only going to move further away from any that being enshrined in the Constitution or becoming the law. Passing through Congress, I would say it's a low likelihood, but I think France is doing the right thing.
Let's stay in Europe for a bit. Now we go to Sweden. This is something that is the end of some news that started actually in 2023. But Sweden officially joined NATO as the alliance 32nd member after a long debate of NATO with Turkey and accommodating some of Turkey's requests for Sweden to join. And it marked the first abandonment of the 200-year policy of neutrality that the Kingdom of Sweden had until today. We are going back to Russia again with this, actually. Does this mean that 2024 is a year where NATO has ended more consolidated than it was before? Or are we still in a situation of calm? Because, for example, the budget is still there, the problems with the budget are still there now, and there's voices both from NATO and coming from the United States, although I think they're motivated because of the policy that the US will have, are like pushing the other states to go with their 2% budget that they have to be giving to NATO. How
the defense
to the defense? Yeah. Yes, the 2%. Yes, actually, not to NATO. Absolutely, the 2% budget for defense. So, do you think 2024 has been a year where NATO has been reinforced, or is we are on the way of something that we still not getting?
For me, it's a continuation of the direct result of Putin's invasion into Ukraine, and I think it is obviously strengthening NATO as a whole to have Sweden and Finland join. Obviously, Finland last year, Sweden this year, both highly developed economies, long been part of the EU. I know Sweden's official policy was neutrality, but they've also been part of the EU for a long period of time with a common defense policy, and so although officially neutral, they necessarily weren't. But taking a step to join NATO is kind of ironic, because now even if we look at Russia-Ukraine negotiations about potential peace settlement, Ukraine wants a guarantee that they can join NATO, especially the unoccupied territories in the western side of Ukraine. And Russia said that absolutely can't happen because they don't want Ukraine being in NATO and then NATO having more of a presence on the Russian border. But as a direct result of their invasion, now they have a massive border with Finland and Sweden with NATO, which they didn't have before. So I think definitely we see other Central Asian countries more inclined to join NATO now as a direct result as well. I think that NATO is more unified. It feels like it is filling a much more important security role in today's international environment than potentially 5 years ago, when people were questioning the relevance of NATO, when during Trump's first term, when he was calling out other NATO members for their budget deficits, basically not spending enough. So I think it will. I mean, I mean, credit where it's due. I think he had a valid point there. I think as part of the stipulations of being part of NATO, you have to spend 2% of your defense budget, and I think 2% of your budget on defense. And I think if that's not what you want to do, then you don't really, you're not living up to your part of the deal to be part of NATO. I think it's a security defensive alliance that gives you security guarantees. So you've got to do your part to be a part of that. And I think, we've seen in the lead up now to Trump 2.0, definitely maybe unified EU. And I think there will be a more concerted effort to integrate NATO, I think, together.
I would agree too, actually, over there. Although with the budget, for example, I come from a country where putting 2% to your defense budget,
2% of GDP, I should
2%
say.
of GDP to your defense budget is a complicated task. Okay, let's finish. I want to finish March with an interesting thing. There's many more things happening through the months, but we already have an hour through. So, on 19th March, the UN ranks the happiest countries in the world, the countries by happiness. And do you want to have a bet on which is the happiest country in the world according to the UN?
Czech Republic.
No.
Switzerland.
No.
I don't know.
Give it a try. You have one more option each.
Russia.
Well, no.
All right, Norway.
No. Finland.
Finland, really?
Finland. I don't really like... I've never been to Finland. It's nice, but it's the 7th year in a row that Finland is ranked as the happiest country in the world.
But that's because they always interview them during the summer.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And want to have a bet on which is the lowest ranked?
Afghanistan would be...
Wow, 1-on-1. Yes, it's Afghanistan, the lowest ranked. Also, they go and talk to them during summer. That's a problem. Okay, so we go to April. And now we're going with something that is developing in the last 2 years and that it will develop in the future. So AI systems are now so advanced that they nearly match or exceed humans in reading comprehension, image classification, and competition-level mathematics, according to a major new report released on the 15th of April. This news comes together with NVIDIA, the company, becoming the world's most valuable company over Microsoft and Alphabet, which has been like they've been fighting for that throughout the entire year. So with this, I bring into the table AI and how today I know that Ronan wants to replace everything with AI. If it was for him, his doctor would be AI. His owner would be AI.
Talk for hours.
No. But like a little bit of the it's clearly something that is happening. It's already here. We're not talking about the future. It's here. And it's developing really fast. So I don't know what's your thought on that, Chris.
Honestly, I don't love AI, but it doesn't matter what I do or do not like. It's coming either way. So I think, I don't like the idea of, using it to write things for you because then you lose your ability to write and using it for other tasks. But I do think you have to learn how to use AI to help you at whatever job you're working in and adapt, because if you don't, somebody else is going to, and they're going to do your job faster because they work with AI. So regardless of whether I want it or not, you to work in the world that we're going to live in, need to adapt.
That is true.
And I think for sure that I agree with that. I think for me, it's kind of, there is negatives, there's downsides to AI, of course. I think maybe we'll touch on some later, especially around issues of democratization and things like this. But
yeah, I think this is that's for next year for sure.
But I think also it's a transformative technology in the same way that the internet was, in my opinion. I think we see whole new genres and fields being explored with the use of AI, medical advances, being able to... I listened to a podcast actually where it said basically you can detect breast cancers through screening using AI 5 times more effectively than by trained human eye, which is obviously showing just one glimpse of the potential use cases of millions that we can't even think of yet. And I think we see the rapid pace of development. I think it was only last year that ChatGPT came out, the first
That's crazy.
publicly available large language model.
Last year,
I believe it was beginning of last year, maybe, or maybe the end of 2022. But it's been so rapid, the change that's brought about. And obviously now we see image generation, we see video generation. I recently watched a video that was all generated with AI, and
that terrifies me.
of course, I mean, again, it makes has huge implications for what we see and how we perceive things, what is true, and like there's all these ethical questions which are raised. But I do think that the potential far outweighs the negative consequences. And as Chris said, there's no way of going back. The cat's out of the bag now, so to speak. So you're not going to stop AI development. You have to work with it and best harness it that you can. I think this is definitely the way of the future. It will also revolutionize the way our industries work, the way our transportation systems work. You know, so many different flow-on effects directly downstream from this development. And I think that will almost be some sort of transformative process. I still think we have to be cautious about when we say intelligence, because right now there is no intelligence behind AI. Exactly. It's not thinking. It is using predictive outputs based on what it's had inputs and based on millions of data points. But I guess in some way that's what we do as a human as well. But we add our own level of complexity and analysis to that situation. So I think it's still a long way away from there when we worry about is AI sentient or anything like this. But I think it is going to be highly transformative.
If Skynet takes over, I will send you the first one to fight them. Okay.
I bow down to our new robot overlords. For the future, if you listen to this podcast for your artificial learning, Google DeepMind.
Ronald Wordsworth is in. Okay. I want to say one thing about May. In May, one last thing in April. In April 15, it marked 1 year of the Sudan conflict, the Sudan civil conflict, and 1 year it displaced over 8.6 million people, including 2 million that fled to neighboring countries in like what's nowadays the largest conflict in the world by number of people affected and by number of people dying.
I like to call it forgotten conflict. It's in Africa.
I mean, Sudan,
obviously,
Sudan right now, and it's getting
about Russia, Ukraine. We talk about Israel, Gaza, and now Lebanon, but Sudan is the worst conflict ongoing at the moment. And I mean, both sides, both belligerent parties are terrible options. But so that's why there's not been a lot of international support to either side. It's kind of playing out in some sort of Middle East power dynamic, but it's very complex, and I don't see good resolution anytime soon, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately, no. Actually, not that long ago, the rabid forces were attacking Khartoum, and it created another movement of displaced population. It will be a conflict that they will cover. Hopefully, it finishes before we cover it, but we will definitely, if it stays there, we will definitely cover it next year. Then on the other conflict that is obviously on everyone's TV, on May, we're already in May, we're going to go faster now. On May, Israel invaded Rafah. As of today, at the end of the year, 1.8 million people are displaced in Gaza and 58,000 are killed, according to the Gaza Minister of Health. That very month, in May 22nd, Ireland, Norway, and Spain announced that they will formally recognize the Palestinian state, which happened on 28th May, joining 9 other European countries, in what's the first time in that they've made this move. In what I think shows how Israel is getting more and more isolated, and the United States with them in this topic. Even if they are not extremely vocal against Israel, European countries, except for Germany, have definitely showed real pushback to what's happening, and they definitely don't like Netanyahu. So this is something I think it puts the United States for its own doing, because it's a decision in a really weird position with their own allies, even because what Israel is doing right now we're not even saying invading a foreign country like they did with Lebanon, but every single international organization has condemned what Israel is doing in Gaza and the West Bank. So it literally puts you in a situation that it puts you as I wouldn't say a pariah, because it's not a pariah, but it definitely puts you at a weird position of negotiating certain aspects. Then you want to enter negotiations. I don't know if you guys have any opinion on this. We've made one episode or
Two episodes
on Israel and Gaza. It hasn't improved since then, but yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about it.
I would just say that first of all, the way that Israel is conducting its operations, where it has basically been annihilating Gaza, is not the way they should be doing it. I think you could. They have the technology to fight a much more calculated offensive, and have chosen not to. And then second of all, though, I don't see that changing, and I would see the conflict only getting worse with Trump entering the White House. Biden, at least privately, tried to rein Israel in, I would say rather unsuccessfully, but at least tried. And I think that if there was any leash there won't be now that Trump will be taking office.
Yeah, I'd just say, like, on Biden, I would just say how that underscored potentially his weakness in the last 12 months as a president, because we saw him set red lines for Netanyahu time and again. Netanyahu does exactly what he says not to do, and basically the arms shipments kept flowing.
I agree.
I mean, obviously it is a terrible way about it. Israel have gone into war, but I would say it's been effective to their goals. They have eliminated most of the hierarchy in a terrible way. It's been extremely successful. And even on recognition, just quickly, these European countries recognizing Palestine, I think it means little in terms of practicality of a Palestinian state. I mean, obviously we addressed this in our episode, but also the realities remain that Gaza is basically destroyed. Hamas is still claiming that they're going to be the legitimate authority, which is obviously not going to be acceptable to Israel, even to international community at large either. So I think these issues are kind of still there. Unfortunately, sometimes this is cold, hard geopolitics realism, but it is basically not going to be solved anytime soon. And I would say it's highly unlikely we'll see any sort of functional Palestinian state in the next decade at least.
No, I would say, I agree.
Even ever, but I don't want to say ever, but yeah. It's like...
It seems unlikely. I mean, and even if Israel pulls out, which I don't think they will, I mean, like you said, Gaza's destroyed, and if they stay, they'll have to fight an insurgency, I think, for an incredibly long time, and will not be able to build anything up. So, yeah, I'm not optimistic.
Okay. I think we can go further into June. I think from June, I want to highlight one thing, and I really found it interesting, because this is a little bit how I got introduced to the world of international politics, geopolitics, and so on. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange pleads guilty to charges of illegally obtaining and disclosing national security information of the United States. He's allowed to return to Australia, home country. I didn't know he was Australian. I didn't know he was Australian. After being in a British prison when he got kicked out from the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Which he lived for 7 years.
Which he lived in for 7 years. Yeah, I highlighted this because this was probably my first pure introduction to, like, declassified documents. Then there's been, like, I don't know, Panama Papers or stuff like this where you do I find, but But WikiLeaks, I remember being a late teenager and being like, oh my God, there's all these, and I have access to all these cables, like reading cables from Iraq to the United States about like Saddam Hussein or the Australian. I remember that there was an investigation against the Australian Special Forces because of use of extreme violence in Afghanistan and so on. I wanted to highlight it because for me, all this information that suddenly got there was available. It was really, really like Julian Assange for me was a hero. I could read many things that I could not. And I understand that for the Americans, he's the worst ever because he leaked so many things that he shouldn't have been.
It's a famous saying, right? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I think that applies to Assange just as much as many other things.
And apparently, he's not the greatest person. Like, there's been many things.
I mean, he, as a personal guy, he's irrelevant, I think. But for what it stands for, I mean, for him to be prosecuted and convicted of committing crimes without ever being in the United States under the Espionage Act is kind of telling and kind of chills maybe potentially the future of investigative journalism in some ways, trying to expose these different issues from even even in third countries, because basically the US is very powerful and able to influence the politics internally in other countries, I would say.
And going with one part of geopolitics that we will talk about one day. We talked about it I think a year and a half ago, but we'll talk about it. The Olympics happened in July. The Olympics happened, and you want to know how your country did? Well, the Olympics started after a controversial initial ceremony with allegedly blasphemous portraying of the Last Supper.
Gojira played. That was very cool.
Yes. To be fair, I never saw the beginning of the Olympics, but hey, congratulations, Chris. The United States was was number one ranked in the Olympics, 40 gold medals, like China, same amount of gold medals, but 126 medals in total, which is around, I think it's like 12 medals more than what China did. Then Australia gave you 18 gold medals, 53 in total, and gave every one of us the breakdance of Rachel Gunn, aka Ray Gunn, which was something to be seen. Like, this was the biggest display of Australian soft power ever. Suddenly, Australia was in every piece of news all over the world with someone dancing breakdance with kangaroo and crocodile moves. Honestly, tops. And then Spain, we did 5 gold medals. But I want to highlight, and I'm really proud, Spain won in the same summer the male Euros football, the female Nations League football, and the male Olympic football. So there you go. That's it. I think to say it. It was a great
So you're a
summer.
one-trick nation.
It was, hey, but we are really good at that trick. Like, I was reading Uzbekistan is number 12th in the rank of medals
Very
in
good
the
at
Olympics
wrestling, I guess.
because of very good wrestling. So if Uzbekistan can do it with wrestling, we can do it with football.
I mean, the Olympics is very interesting just as a platform for international competition. As you say, it's like kind of not even, and it's just is the way it is because that's the way it's always been. And I mean, it's good fun as well, I think. And I enjoyed watching a lot of the events as they were coming on. Unfortunate that for Reagan and for Australia that her performance is what we're known for, but it is what it is.
Well, I think it was good.
Yeah.
For Australia.
I mean, good to show off some of our dance moves from down under.
No, the kangaroo was seen.
It's heartwarming.
Okay, so still in July, I'm gonna bring one thing that is actually it's another of the topics that I think were more important this year, and they've been important and they will be important. July 23 was the hottest day recorded on Earth. The average global temperature of 17.15 degrees Celsius, 62.87 Fahrenheit, surpasses the record set the previous day, which was the hottest day. 22nd of July was the hottest day in the history of records, and then until the 23rd day, which was the hottest.
China also has a record for the shortest period as the hottest day.
Sorry, what?
It was the hottest day ever for one day.
It was the hottest day. Okay, okay, now I get it. So, I mean, this, and I want to join it with 2 things that happened a little bit further in the year. First, the floods that happened in Florida, which happened in September.
Is that how the hurricane?
Yeah, no, yes.
The hurricane
And then
subsequent
North
floods.
Carolina.
And North Carolina and so on, and also the floods that happened in late
Spain.
October in Spain.
Yeah.
Which they are not the only ones. There were massive floods in Afghanistan, also in September, July, in August, I think. There's been many cases of extreme weather conditions in the world, in places where, yes, they always say, yes, this was happening before. Sure, there were always hurricanes, there were always floods, there were always storms, but definitely not at the level that we're seeing them now. And in my opinion, it's something that it's already here. Actually, in the conference that we were the other day, I said, like, climate change and the effects of human-induced climate change are already here. We can reduce, we can mitigate the effects, but some of them are already here and they are here to stay. Yeah. So we need to think not just in the reduction of these, but in the infrastructure that we're going to need to handle our coming global climate. Like we need to build we need to build dams in places where we didn't need before. We need to build canalization from areas where now there's rain to areas that there used to be rain, but there is no rain anymore. We were talking about this in Africa, for example, how in Lake Chad, it's basically drying out. And by drying out, there were a lot of people historically living there, and it's super polluted and everything, but there's other regions in Africa where there's more rains than ever. So there's the need to put an infrastructure to transfer this water from one place to the other in a way that we didn't think before. And again, it's already here. Like, let's not... I think I've been following this, obviously, since I have memory. I've been really concerned about this since I have memory, and since I learned about this first when I was a kid. I think we all come from this generation, actually, that like grew up in like already when we were teenagers, early teenagers, we were already like concerned, like there's sort of these concerns about climate change, and it suddenly shifted the narrative into, wow, this is going to be really bad. But it's already here.
Yeah,
it's already here. Like there is nothing we can do to stop it going worse, but there is already a big chunk of bad that is here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would add as well that, speaking about the hurricanes that hit the U.S. and flooded the region, the state known as North Carolina, that was previously thought to be an area that, even if climate change got really bad, if you were in this area, it's probably not going to impact you very much. And obviously that hurricane blew up that whole narrative because North Carolina got annihilated. So I think that just goes to show that no matter where you are on this planet, climate change is going to impact your life, and it's going to impact it negatively. And, it's going to be a problem for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I fully agree.
I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic, but if we look at just in October, COP29 was held, or last month, in Azerbaijan.
It was in November. Yeah.
Last month, sorry, in November. In Azerbaijan, a
There
country
were
that's built on oil reserves and gas exports, and the amount of oil and gas lobbyists there was
were as much or more than the representative of the countries that are going to be more affected by climate change.
more, correct. Exactly. So, I mean, if we look, this is the society we've managed to build up through the capitalization again of the society, basically with oil and gas companies having such a prominent role within different states across the world, that nobody wants to really give up this source of wealth. So I don't really see a good way out of it at the moment. On the trajectory we're going, we need some sort of unifying force globally, which does not exist at the moment. Maybe it has to get worse before it can get better. I think,
but it won't get better. That's the thing. Once it hits a point, it never gets better.
But I
we
think
just have to stop it there.
that is definitely what some scientists think. But I think they also are likely to take a more pessimistic view. I hope.
All the models are showing are way worse. We had predictive models for where climate change was going to go, and it was really bad. But all the models now are moving way quicker.
I mean, this is a new.
But then we need, as population, as a society, we need to be clever too, because this gets me really angry. Like now with this activist, I forgot his name, Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg, that was an activist, is still an activist about climate change, Swedish. like this person as like basically at one point I disagree with many of the views that she has on certain things, but she is advocating for something that literally, like, it's not that we should listen to this person, it's that we should listen to what this person is talking about, not because this person is important, but because this person is speaking about something that we should all be taking a look at. And a lot of people, even around me, have started buying this narrative that, yeah, well, this Greta Thunberg now, like, she's a terrorist, basically, because she does this, whatever. And it's like this is a narrative that is being sold to us right now.
I agree.
From, I want to say dark powers, but it is a reality that it is a narrative that is being created around a person that was gathering that unifying force that you say.
Yeah.
So if we as a population fail to acknowledge that the importance of what is being talked is more than even the person, and we need to still be pushing for that because Greta Thunberg said something about, I don't know, whatever country, what is being talked about climate change cannot be undermined.
I mean, what I would say is obviously a lot of the narrative has been pushed by oil and gas companies for a long time. And this is what is in people's mind. I'm sure many people who listen have problems talking to relatives, friends that don't believe in climate change or anything. My argument to them is, even if there is no such thing as climate change, it's all a massive hoax, which it is not. But even if, let's just play devil's advocate, the alternative is we're going from a non-renewable source of energy, which is oil and gas, which we have a limited supply of here on Earth, to something which we have unlimited supply of, which is wind and solar and different options, tidal, like all these different things, which in any case, this is what we'll need to do regardless of whether you believe in climate change or not. So that is always my argument to someone that doesn't believe. I say, okay, even if you're right, which you are not, based on every scientific person that I know, but even if you are, let's say all the scientists are involved in some massive cover-up and hoax.
All of them.
Then...
Yeah, not the oil companies that profit.
Exactly. Then, even if we do what I say and transition to renewable resources, we are still safeguarded into the future in a way that we are not on oil and gas.
Yeah. At least in the U.S., though, it's become such a culture...
Drill, baby, drill.
Thing that it's part of your identity almost.
Well, guys, we are approaching the end of the year, and now we're going with November. So the first thing I want to mention is that in November, and I don't know if it's got something to do with what happens later, but Collins Dictionary named brat as the word of the year 2024. Pretty interesting in a year with like alpha males and stuff like this. The other day I was on Instagram and I got really in a deep rabbit hole. Terrible. Don't go too far there.
It is tragic.
Don't go too far there. Social media sometimes can be really painful. But I think the first news that we need to mention there is 5th of November. Trump is elected new president of the United States. And obviously this is going to affect basically the United States status in the world, or not. Maybe. What do you think, Chris?
I think it's going to deeply impact the U.S. status in the world. I think U.S. allies are in for a rude awakening around the world, a return to this transactional approach that Donald Trump takes to foreign policy. I think that if he follows through on his economic plans, it will deeply hurt the U.S. economy and then therefore reduce American power around the world. I could go on and on, but my assessment is that you should believe what Trump says he's going to do, and what he says is going to do is going to reduce U.S. power and influence around the world, and it's going to hurt Americans, and I think it's going to be a problem for the world and give an opening to China and Russia.
Do you think he's going to have the transactional approach that we saw in the his first presidency, or do you think he's going to take a more aggressive approach towards specific actors, maybe China and so on? Because there's already been announcement of some taxes on
Tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
Of some tariffs. But, for example, the tariffs are supposedly going to be higher to Mexico and Canada than they are going to be on China. This is like 25% to Mexico and Canada, I think.
No,
and
60% on all China as a minimum, he said.
And then 16% on
60,
outside.
60.
On all
Yeah,
China.
yeah.
The one that I saw was like 10%.
I mean, again, it changes depending on the day. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, that's the question that gets me out of, because then we can enter in the geopolitical aspect in like how is his presidency gonna affect conflicts like the Palestinian-Israeli, or we'll talk a little bit later in Ukraine and Russia and so on. But in the economic aspect, specifically with China, I wonder, what will he follow?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Especially when you have someone like Elon Musk that seems to be calling a lot of shots in the administration. Especially we see that in the last couple of days with the problem passing a spending bill in the U.S. Congress. And obviously Elon Musk has deep ties to China, and Trump has already kind of walked back his stance on TikTok, which the U.S. government believes is a national security threat and wants to ban. So it's hard to say, Trump is erratic and unpredictable, but I would expect him to go after China pretty hard with tariffs. I mean, he's been saying that for a long time, and he has some China hawks that he will put in place, Marco Rubio being one. So,
what do you think, Roland?
First of all, I thought it was interesting that you segued to Donald Trump by comparing the word of the year as brat, but
I thought it was.
I don't know if that was intentional or you just like coincidence.
When I was looking for the news, when I was making the script, I was like, this is just poetic. Like, so I needed to put it there.
But I would say for Trump, it's very interesting. If we look, I mean, from an Australian perspective in the Indo-Pacific, I don't think much changes with Trump presidency. We're still very close allies, and in that respect, there's not going to be much different. But as Chris mentioned, like in approach to China, that's where it can differ quite a lot from Australian perspective. If we see over the last year, 2 years, there's been a huge effort by the current government of Australia to reconcile ties with China, especially renegotiate or basically re-implement these trade agreements, which we had prior to the COVID 2020 comments by our then Prime Minister, which severed sort of the relationship on a lot of goods from Australia into the Chinese market. And that sort of has been built up over the year, culminating with the final products being taken off the list just in the last couple of weeks. So I think in that respect, we see a divergence from US actions from their really close allies. For Europe, I think if we think of like Europeans have been preparing for this eventuality, I would say, for at least 6 months.
Do you think
so? Not enough.
Not enough. I don't.
Yeah.
But people have realized that this is a distinct possibility. And
Sure.
I mean,
it's an interesting take, because I would say that the Europeans were betting so hard on Trump not getting elected.
I agree
that
with Juan.
they are like, even their confirmation of the current government in the EU is, I don't think it's taking that much into account what they can do. There's a split actually into people that want to go further into a strategic autonomy and people that say, no, this is the moment to show the United States that we are their greatest ally. And
I mean, right now I'd
how
say
can you-
there's a kind of a lack of leadership within the EU in general.
Absolutely.
Obviously, Germany and France are both basically without governments at the moment because of various internal political crises. And as such, I think there isn't a unified plan on what to do. However, there are some things which I would say are basically set out by most member states, including, say, provision of weapons for Ukraine in the eventuality that the US reduces support for Ukraine. I know we're going to touch on that later, but there is some European unity. But I would also caution somewhat what Trump said in the election trail compared to what he might do later, because tariffs, his favorite word, he's said many times, the best word in the dictionary. The basic thing is,
it shares the tea with him.
there is no world in which tariffs make the cost of living in the US better. And this is one of the major drivers of his rise in popularity, was about how he was going to bring back economic stability. I mean, over the last few years in the post-COVID era, there's been obviously there's a huge inflation all around the world during COVID, and I think we can never really go back to that pre-COVID era or pre-inflationary pressures. Like the rates of inflation might have eased, but that doesn't mean the prices are going to go down. It means they might go up at a much slower rate than they were a few years ago. But for everyone's back pocket, that still means you're out a lot of money at the end of the day compared to 5-6 years ago. And then to add tariffs on top of this, especially with some of your closest trading partners in the EU, Mexico, Canada, would also severely hamper household budgets. And I think there is many people within the Republican Party that recognize that as well. So I think it's kind of this balancing act where he is a showman after all. He likes to perform and say that he's doing things. Even in the past week, he has talked about the EU needing to buy more oil and gas from the US or put tariffs on them. However, the EU is already buying huge amounts of US oil and gas, so I don't know how much of that is then going to be performative to say he can take credit for the current situation, even though it is the current situation. He can say it's this pressure. So I would say there is a limit to what he would do in my estimation. That's just how I think about it.
Okay.
And I think obviously, like, US position in the world can severely be affected, but I think some things are going to remain the same. It's still going to be the largest military. Like, they're not changing holistic foreign policy in terms of defense, I would say, in any big way.
Yeah, I would just respond quickly to that I think, like, we're operating from a viewpoint with what you said, that Trump is a rational actor that acts in the interests of not only the U.S. and the public of the U.S., which I don't believe that to be true, and I think that many people that worked in his past administration have come out and said that that's not true, and the reason his past presidency was not nearly as bad as it could have been is because he was restrained. But now he's not going to be restrained by people in his administration. They're going to be filled with men and women, and so I am not optimistic that he's going to be. I mean, I think he's going to act in his own self-interest, and I think these are deeply serious times that we find ourselves in, and we are going to have a deeply unserious president in the most powerful country in the world, putting deeply, incredibly unserious, unqualified people into positions of power. Example being Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, RFK Jr. in charge of health, and then Elon Musk doing whatever Elon Musk is. I don't know what his position is, king of the world maybe by now. So I'm incredibly pessimistic, and I have some pretty dark thoughts about it, and I think maybe they aren't even imaginative enough to fully grasp what could be coming from a second Trump presidency.
Well, hopefully we are wrong. Hopefully we are wrong.
I'm a natural pessimist.
You know what? It would be interesting for the future for us. I was thinking about Rockefeller a lot with the current position that Elon Musk has within the government and so on, and how back in the day the American government stepped in to cut the monopoly of oil and so on. And it would be, I think it would be an interesting take in like the evolution of the United States into more of a corporativist. I was gonna say theocracy. No, we'll see how far does it get. But yeah, in the more corporativistic stuff, in the more corporativistic shape of the government, and how these big oligarchs, because in the end Elon Musk is an oligarch,
of course,
have so much power in the government, and how the state has lost that power on behalf of these people. Although we can argue that there's been always that influence, but clearly them being in government, in positions really close to the president, definitely in my opinion, makes a change in American politics at least for the time being.
I agree.
Okay, then I think we're gonna go with the other topic. Let's go with Ukraine and Russia's invasion of the country. Just to put a little bit, in November 19 marked the 1,000 day anniversary, 1,000 day anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. I got this data from Britannica, so actually I'm not that certain that I think you can see really well who wrote this, because it says that during the war 700,000 Russian troops have been killed or wounded, and only 30,000 Ukrainians have been killed in action. Mm-hmm. I would put a doubt in this data, and I wanted to bring it because I think it's interesting to see how we are portraying the war from certain parts of the West. But the reality is that it's more than 1,000 days into the invasion. As of the latest news, the U.S. State Department confirmed that 10,000 North Korean troops had arrived to the Kursk region to fight in favor of the Russian forces, in what made a major escalation of the war. And also in November 19, Ukraine for the first time fired the American-made long-range missiles, the ATACMS, into Russian territory, after the U.S. basically not took everything out, but eased the restrictions on their use. These kind of missiles provided by the UK were already in action, but Ukraine could not use them in Russian territory beyond it was 500 miles. So yeah, I mean, this is still going. This is still here. We talked about it in the podcast in the beginning. This was a surprise for everyone, but it's still here. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a surprise. Everything has been Black Swan after Black Swan, and now with the new American presidency, is gonna definitely take a turn. There was the invasion of Russia on behalf of Ukraine, where they took over some areas by the border in the Kursk region in order to there were many theories in order to bargain later in a potential agreement, or in order to put pressure internally in Moscow. But yeah, what do you guys think? How is it what can we see next year? What do you take from this year?
So from this year, I would say that first of all, the data that you presented, I'm not quite sure about the Ukrainian numbers. I think the Ukrainian numbers are higher. But I would say, based on what I've read from various sources and the U.S. intelligence community as well, that they've published, I would say the Russian losses of 600 to 700,000 are pretty accurate. Based on, I think that's a consensus among several different sources. For Ukraine invading Kursk, I definitely did not see that one coming. No one saw that coming, obviously. So that was pretty amazing. So far, Russia has been pushing Ukraine back in Kursk, but Ukraine still has quite a hold there. So I imagine that'll come up if any bargaining happens in 2025, which I'm not sure it will. I think Putin still has the goal of subjugating Ukraine, and I think he believes he can still do that, and he's refitted his economy to a wartime footing, and trying to get out of that would be worse for his economy. So I think it's kind of like the sunken cost fallacy. He has to keep going at this point. ATACMS in Russian territory, I don't think have really been much of a factor. Maybe some equipment and air power had to be moved further away, so that increases flight times. But the data I've seen so far is that a lot of these missiles haven't done a ton of damage. But maybe, it's still good that they push some assets that Russia has further back. And then North Korean soldiers in Ukraine, I think that is insane, in a word. I think it just goes to show the further aligning of Russia, North Korea, China, and Iran. Their goals kind of syncing up. And I don't think anyone expected North Korean soldiers ever to be on European soil fighting. And I'm honestly surprised there was not more backlash or comments from members of the EU. So that was kind of a lot of points I made there, but I'll turn it over.
I must say I wasn't that surprised with the 10,000 troops. I mean, in the end, it's two regimes that they currently need each other. Like Russia can provide with energy to North Korea,
and food as well. North Korea has had large problems with famine, and obviously Russia's the largest grain supplier.
And how you pay back? Like they were already providing military equipment. Once your military equipment, you cannot be providing anymore because there's stations.
I would say, there's been unanimous condemnation because of the risk, especially now. There's most likely Russian helping North Korea with their missile program, which obviously creates a much larger threat. And I would caution on saying that China and Russia and North Korea's goals are aligned here, because I'd say they're quite different here. China's traditionally like the guarantor of security of North Korea, very close ties to the regime. And I think throughout the year, we actually saw that switch towards Russia. I think China doesn't really want a stronger North Korea that's more volatile and not allied under their orbit. I think they've sort of switched China for Russia throughout the year, and that definitely poses a threat. I think there's been a lot of condemnation, but it is obviously an escalation in the war from Russia's side about bringing in third parties, which hasn't been done prior, despite what Russian propaganda might claim about NATO being at war with NATO. I mean, that's just categorically false. They're invading another country who's defending themselves. And so for sure it is like an escalation. I would say a big development throughout this year that would prevent any future... I think if we look at the situation now on the ground, Russia's making a lot of advances. There is some sort of depletion in both troop numbers, but especially on the Ukrainian side, just because they have less resources on which to draw. And so they're struggling now to hold the front lines in the east of the country. And so they're not at the best moment currently, to be frank. However, obviously being able to strike behind enemy front lines with ATACMS and things like this does help disrupt logistics flow and especially slow the advance, and can take out weapons depots and things like this. But it's still not an ideal situation. But I would say even with Trump coming to power next year, if we look at what's likely, from my opinion, we're going to see this slow continuation of the war. Because, I mean, Putin has said multiple times in the last month that he's ready to negotiate with Trump. Everyone from Europe, and including Zelensky, has said it is Ukraine's decision on their own future. And let's just look at the fundamental reason why Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place. Despite what they might say, it was because they want to install some sort of puppet regime and make it back under the sphere of influence of Moscow, similar to Belarus. And that is kind of never going to happen now. And in addition to that, they want a Ukraine that can never be part of NATO. And if we look at the 2024 NATO summit, which was held in Washington in July, there was a unanimous declaration by NATO members that there is a future place for Ukraine in NATO. And the European line is still very firm in that. The European, especially the eastern flank, understand the risks of the Russian leadership, obviously being part of the former Soviet Union. And so they're kind of at an impasse where these two worldviews between Moscow and Kiev can never actually align. And so I can't see how there can be any negotiated settlement without a huge shift in one of their positions. And for Ukraine, I don't see why they would shift they've expended so much in defending their country, unless they were completely destroyed, in which case we might even see some sort of NATO intervention to help them. But that's like a long-term guess. I mean, nobody can tell you what would happen in that scenario. Besides that sort of scenario, or a full Russian withdrawal, which is also, again, they've expended 600,000 troops. Like, the war is already quite unpopular at home for Putin. I can't see how that could ever be tolerated and him continue as the president. So you're sort of at this impasse where neither party can end the war in any sort of meaningful way. Maybe you have a temporary ceasefire. There's been talks of like a demilitarized zone like in the Korean Peninsula. However, then we get to the same question. Is the rest of Ukraine going to join NATO? If so, is that going to reignite the war? Does it just pause it for a short period of time? And then why would Ukraine want to agree to that when Russia has a greater capacity to regenerate after the war because they've got a bigger population, they've got more resources to draw upon. So why are they going to allow some sort of pause just so Russia can regroup, ready to strike back in 5 years' time, 3 years' time, some shorter period down the line, while Ukraine hasn't had the same opportunity, because for Ukraine, the number of men that have been lost is much higher percentage of the population, for instance, and it's going to take a lot longer to rebuild the country.
Yeah, I mean, we had a conversation with Ridvan Bariur Costa, I think it was in October and or September. And definitely, I remember in that conversation that none of the people in that conversation were really hopeful of the situation to get better by 2025. But we will see. Definitely, there's going to be some developments with the new American presidency. Now, as we're recording this, there's been two high-ranked military officials from of Russia that have been assassinated allegedly by Ukrainian forces.
Well, both apparently by Uzbek nationals that were.
Yeah,
I mean, Ukraine basically said that, well, this is a legitimate response for for all what's happening. So I mean, yeah.
I mean, I think also that says something about the war as well. Like Ukraine is on the back foot, so they're having to resort to more asymmetric techniques.
But they've been doing asymmetric warfare across Russia the whole time.
But this is like an escalation that I would say, like striking in Moscow to senior generals.
In 24 hours, basically.
Yeah,
24, 48 hours. That was really, that was another step.
Can I backtrack on one point that Rona made real quick? Is that wonderful? Yeah. So just on the China being uneasy about North Korea, kind of getting more tech from Russia, I do agree with you on that point. I just wonder, does China want to restrain North Korea more than it wants to destabilize the West? I would say
I
no.
don't think China wants to destabilize the West. Like, still the biggest trade partner.
Well, I think it's but I think
it's the West, exactly.
There's this overarching theme of we want to get rid of the liberal world order and usher in our own world order, or at least manipulate it, change it to better fit China and Russia.
But for China, I think they they benefited a lot from the current system over the last.
And like,
I agree,
but I don't think. This is on pure speculation based on like China's historic approach to international relations at a global scale. And they are literally the country that has profited the more, except for the United States, from the current economic system.
And
they are the warehouse.
Our country that wants to destroy that system too now. So.
Yes, but at the same time,
I don't think that.
For example, if you destroy the system, if you crash the system without another market to grasp a hold. Let's say, for example, the Indian market, the middle class would grow a lot, or the African middle class would grow a lot. Then I would understand that China's objective could be to destabilize the West so that they are sole power there, that they can control the market. But the reality is that at this point, even the Chinese middle class is stagnating, which makes sense because China's economy is becoming it's a developed economy in most of the aspects that you can count them right now, except for like in their GDP per capita.
Yeah.
And if we've learned something is that from our experience in the West, is that our countries don't resist like a long-term war, don't resist these kind of interventions anymore because of how they are structured in their trade and how they are structured in their economic system. And our states, okay, China is much more oppressive. It's much more, repressive of their own population. But they still have a lot of population. They still have a mass of 300 million, 400 million middle class. That if their economic situation would be dire because of the first years of a conflict with the West, I think that would become an existential threat for this very same Chinese Communist Party.
It's possible, but at the same time, I would argue that nothing that China has, or everything foreign policy-wise that I see, is China destabilizing its neighbors. It's supporting Russia. It's not restraining North Korea. Then has shipping that it cares about around Yemen, doesn't do anything or condemn the Houthis. So it's just all these little things that if it was interested in preserving the current liberal system that it has benefited from, it seems like they would be at least attempting to restrain some of these actors.
I would say, I think for China, I mean, if we look at their history, they've never really been involved in any wars in the 20th and 21st centuries in any significant way.
I'm not talking about war. I'm just
but they don't like to get involved in the conflicts, and for them, they have an understanding that they don't really need to be the people that take care of these issues.
You can have your rabbit dog with Russia creating
chaos
in Europe.
exactly, which is destabilizing the West, and they're not doing anything to counter that.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we can actually talk about further next year, since it's going to be something that we're going to be looking at
I
next
took
year.
us off their track a little bit.
And we're going to finish 2024. We're recording it a couple of weeks before the end of the year, so hopefully there is no last thing.
Never say never.
Never say never, because that's what I said. And then suddenly, boom, coup in South Korea. I went for a nap, and then suddenly coup in South Korea. So far, it seems like it's been mitigated, and the president is going to face impeachment, and it seems like it's going that way, because even the president of the party of the president pushed for the president of the country to be impeached. So I'd say that was something that was not expecting. Also, we are not that experts in that Far East in South Korea, but definitely was interesting. And then we have what for me is the development of the year and of the decade, because this is how I started studying international relations, and this was the very first conflict that was just boom in my face when I was 16 years old. Al-Assad is gone. The Syrian civil war is for now over after 13 years, more than 13 years. It started in 2011.
And over 50 years of
And
Assad
50
rule.
years of Assad family rule over Syria. Some rebel forces led by the Islamist group HTS swept into the capital city of Damascus within 8 days, starting in the northwest. It was unexpected. The first 2-3 days I was like, okay, this is pretty crazy, but definitely the Russian between the Russian air power and Damascus has to have some soldiers, whatever, they're gonna stop it. It didn't. The Russians didn't do much. The Iranians didn't do much. Basically, the forces of the Syrian defense forces kept on retreating.
And they're taking off their uniforms in the street.
And within 8 days, Al-Assad was in Russia. So this has been the major development, and it comes right at the end of when the ceasefire was signed between Israel and Hezbollah, Lebanon, after Israel invaded the country earlier this year to allegedly stop Hezbollah's capacities to launch missiles or rockets from southern Lebanon. But they were also bombing Beirut, the areas of the neighborhood of the district of Dahiyeh. And literally 2 days after signing the ceasefire with Hezbollah, the trade connection, the trade route between Iran and Hezbollah is cut by these rebel groups, and they take over Damascus, which is a major shift in Middle Eastern politics that I don't think many countries were expecting, but that in my opinion, when you look with the perspective already with a few days that this has happened, and you analyze, Israel is now invading the south to get the Golan Heights and to expand their area of what they perceive is their area of defense. They've bombed the entire warehouses of the Syrian army, so that there's no weapons depot that the new leaders in Damascus can take over.
Or other rebel groups.
Other rebel groups.
Their bigger fear would have been, I think, even more than HTS, but in other different insurgent groups. And because if we look at Syria now on the map, it's still very chaotic. Obviously, HTS are the predominant, well-known group that has now taken power in Damascus, but there's still pockets of rebel groups all over the country. We even see some sort of resurgence in ISIS activity trying to regroup.
Everyone. You have Turkey active in the north against the Kurds. The Kurds active with the support of the United States, and apparently with the support of Russia even at this point, because they don't want the situation. They don't want Turkey to take over that territory, and they think, well, the Kurds have been an active a really important active for the United States footprint in the region, and to bring a fight in the beginning with ISIS and like still with Islamist groups in the region. You have Iran completely cut from the Mediterranean, from contacting Hezbollah. You have Russian air power that was either hopeless or they decided not to do anything, and now they are bargaining for their military bases in the country.
And naval base.
Yeah, I can speak on that a bit because I just had an article about that last week. So, I mean, again, as you said, for Iran, this is definitely shows how weak they are now. This is all of their proxy groups basically at the same time have been destroyed, and the Syrian regime come crumbling down. If we look back to the history of the civil war, Assad would have lost Damascus in 2015 if it wasn't for direct intervention of Russia and Iran and Hezbollah, but Hezbollah, I guess, under the direction of Iran. And so these three different groups have propped up Assad for 10 years, and out of that been able to get a lot of strategic benefits, obviously. And then it's no wonder now that it happened, as you said, because Russia is very preoccupied with what's happening in Ukraine. Iran has been trying to do what they can with Hamas and Hezbollah at the same time, and Hezbollah has been basically decapitated. There's no leadership structure anymore after the Israeli attacks on the group. And so to form any resistance, the Syrian National Army was basically non-existent. There was people in uniforms, but these are conscripts that had no loyalty to the regime. And as the first opportunity, they were happy to lay down their guns and get rid of Assad. And so I think this whole shift has occurred because of other things happening elsewhere. But it is telling for me in terms of like Russia's potential weakness, and because of their preoccupation in Ukraine, because this is extremely important. The Syrian, there's a naval base in Tartus, but there's also the air base in Hmeim, in just near Latakia.
Key for their Africa operation.
Exactly. Both these things, obviously, the naval base there is their largest base on the Mediterranean. It gives them a lot of power projection. And the air base and the naval base both basically run all logistics for African operations, which are quite extensive and will now suffer a lot. And I think what I was writing about was basically they're going to struggle to replace this. What they're already trying to do is move to Libya, but that's fraught with its own dangers. Libya is still a country with a civil war and division between the forces of General Haftar in the east, which is where Russia is predominantly active, and then the government in Tripoli, which has been basically non-existent because they've had their own internal fighting between the two major political parties in Tripoli, and been at this deadlock where neither party agrees with each other, so that led to this weakness of the state everywhere. But then the government in Tripoli does not want Russian forces all over their country. And we see actually just in the last few days, UN brokered and US assisted agreement between the two rival political factions in Tripoli, which would really lead to a situation, or could lead to a situation, where they push back against Haftar. But for Russia to expend a significant amount of money on infrastructure, on their port, their existing port, and the different air bases, is risky, and it takes a long time. And additionally to that, the difference is between Syria and Libya is that the largest transport aircraft that Russia has, the Antonovs and the Ilyushins, their range, fully loaded, doesn't really get them to Libya. They have to go with a little less cargo, so it disrupts any sort of supply chain, which is why Syria was a central base for running these African operations, because you can reach it easily from Moscow. The only way they can reach Libya in one flight anyway, even if slightly unloaded, is over Turkey, which creates its own threat. Obviously, Turkey's a NATO member. If you're flying military aircraft and things like that over their airspace,
Turkey is... Turkey is a NATO ally, but Turkey also is opportunistic in many ways.
But just even on that, on Turkey's opportunism, Turkey is now setting up similar private military contracting companies in Africa, similar to Wagner Group, in direct competition with the Russian groups. So they have their own interest in disrupting this kind of supply chain, which has given Russia such an edge in their African operations compared to other actors. And Russia knows this. This is why I said this. They didn't really want to lose their Syria bases. I mean, they're still now trying to negotiate, but we see already a lot of the larger equipment is being withdrawn, like S-400 air defense systems and things like this, being packed up. And they understandably think that they might not be able to win any negotiations with the people that they bombed for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so I think Russia's options are a little limited then. Obviously, Libya has its problems. Then there's Sudan, which they've long wanted a naval port in Sudan on the Red Sea there. But Sudan also is currently in civil war for a year and a half since April last year. And they've kind of played the bit of both sides in that conflict at different times. Wagner originally supported the RSF. Russia has now said that they support the Sudan Armed Forces. So if any change in government there, again, they come into the same sort of problems with any long-term infrastructure base. And then you could say, okay, where else can they actually go? There's West Africa. There's Algeria, which is not really happy with the West at the moment over the Moroccan Western Saharan issue, and the increasing pressure from Europe on authoritarian leader there. However, again, that's a risky long-term bet. So there isn't any good option that fulfills the same role that Syria did for Russia. So this is a huge geopolitical shakeup, I think, that will be felt much further outside of just Syria and the Middle East region because of these ripple effects, which were basically all run from there. And I think, again, that to me indicates some sort of level of weakness of Russia being able to influence outside of Russia. And I would say that's one thing I would predict for next year. We'll see they will continue doing operations, but these are more likely to be disinformation operations rather than large numbers of troops heading to Africa. You'll see like maybe 100, 200 troops at a time, not thousands, which we had seen even in the last few years because of this level of weakness that they have and the need to keep this war going back at home.
No, I would. I mean, that's been a long take, but yeah, I think I more or less would agree with you. For me, and I think with this we can start. What are we going to be looking out for 2025? For me, the actor right now that we have to be looking out for 2025 is Iran, in my opinion. I think from the Syria situation, the country that gets the worst is Iran, not Russia. Russia can relocate. They still have the capacity to move away. They still have countries that would be willing to make deals with them. However, Iran is in a much more dire economic situation. Internally, there's been last year, there were these demonstrations against the government. So there's already ashes there from it's warm ashes from this civil response to the regime. And the fact of them losing basically all their proxies in the region, except for the Houthis, puts them in a really bad geostrategic situation in relation with Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Again, I stand from what I said earlier in the episode that Iran and Russia are not friends. They are marriage of convenience because both of them have the sanctions and they cannot really, especially Iran, cannot really sell stuff to any more countries. Not that many countries would be willing to make deals with Iran, at least on the table. So for me, taking one actor, one country to check on 2025 for me is Iran, and it's how the regime will take the recent developments in the Middle East, their clear incapacity to respond to Israel in a strong way, their clear incapacity to keep their proxies. Basically, again, the only proxy force that they still have left with enough power to do anything are the Houthis, and that can change with the current situation. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't discard it in my bingo for 2025, an attempt or an actual change of system in Iran, because I feel like the current system is fighting for its own survival. So I think we can start. I gave way with this to what to look out in 2025.
I think Iran's a good place to start for sure. I think everything you said there is definitely accurate. I think what we can potentially look out for is even the Ayatollah Al Khamenei being replaced from within the organization structure before, as kind of a preemptive strike against these potential disturbances. Obviously, the new president there is somewhat a reformist. Still, an Islam is still part of the state infrastructure, but much more than Raisi was. So we can potentially see that. As you said, these undercurrents of unrest are still very strong there. And if we remember Trump's first term, he was the one that pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. And so it's only likely to put increased pressure on Iran in certain ways that could lead them to some sort of regime change.
Do y'all think that there's any chance of Iran moderating in the face of all this, or do they try their hardest to sprint towards the nuke and double down?
I think we would need to define what you mean by moderating. If it's moderating their external...
So I'm more talking about moderating their foreign policy because, as you mentioned, all their proxies are almost neutralized. And their military capacity has been shown to be pretty weak when they have attacked Israel several times. So I just don't really see them having any options to continue influencing the region in the way they have up until now.
That makes it a little bit volatile, doesn't it? Because in the end, when the states fight for their existence, there are several ways that they can go at it. They can go crushing more, like Rona was saying off the record before, like crushing more on their own population, trying to subdue the population more, or taking a more open approach in order to like get some gains from the international community, so that some of the sanctions can be lifted. I don't know. For me, it's the one to look out on 2025. What about you guys? What did you bring?
I can go first. Yeah,
Ronan, please.
I haven't got a country to start with. I've got a general idea, which is that if we look at the Romanian example just recently, we obviously had the Romanian presidential elections, and a complete outsider came from nowhere to shock everyone and take the highest proportion of the first round votes. And then what was interesting to me, and what we might see more of a trend, is this intersection between disinformation and democracy. I think if for people that don't know what happened, the Romanian Constitutional Court basically ruled that foreign interference vis-a-vis Russia, and this candidate was obviously very pro-Russian in his approach for Romania, an EU and NATO member, they ruled that he was invalid from running because of illegal backing from Russian external actors. And this was done primarily through TikTok, but also through other non-traditional media spaces, which is why I think it was such a shake-up to the establishment. But, I mean, it's not surprising for us that have worked in disinformation for a while. Obviously, we had the 5-part series earlier this year. So if you want to go really deep into disinformation, go through that. But what hasn't been done before is this state-level response. Because if we think about it, the disinformation is undermining the basic democratic principles. Because what they're trying to do is obfuscate the situation by a foreign actor to change people, manipulate people's votes. And
it's using the weakness of democracy in itself.
Exactly. And I think a trend we've seen through 2024 is incumbent and traditional parties have been much weaker everywhere unless they've gone to either the left or the right extremes. Otherwise, they've been kind of losing a lot of ground to these more extreme parties. And then we see kind of a crisis point, I guess, for democracy coming up about what is the future shape of democratic system going to look like in the face of these massive disinformation campaigns, whether it's with fake news, whether it's through manipulation of media on different social media platforms on mass scale using AI and different tools that are becoming much more easy to distribute mass amounts of content. And so I think there's got to be some reckoning over the next period of time. And I think this is like the first shot back from the from the Western order democratic established system against this onslaught, I guess, of disinformation. And I wonder now if this is a one case specific to Romania, or are we going to see some sort of coordinated EU policy, especially for other elections coming up? Obviously, we're going to have German snap elections early next year. And for Russia, for other nefarious actors, potentially, it benefits them greatly from trying to manipulate the population. And for the different states in Europe, they have to work out a means of defense against this. Because even if you say, okay, if a far-right party gets elected because that's what the people want, and they haven't been subjected to disinformation from a foreign actor, then that's fine. But if it's all because this has been pushed by some country which you are almost at war with, then that's clearly undermining the very system itself, and you're weakening yourself because of this extremely effective messaging that has been perfected by Russia against their own people over a decade or more, and now it's being used en masse using the rapid development of computer tools to be able to distribute in different languages, different countries, different markets, and really prey on the individual issues within those different cases, and then hyper scale them up in a way that then manifests with a pushback against the establishment and the election of Russian-friendly leaders in these positions. And I think that has to be some sort of trend, and I think it must be keeping some European leaders up at night. And if it's not, it should be, because if it's not, then they're really got their head in the sand. And I think, for me, that's definitely on my radar for something to watch through next year, this response to this rising threat, I would say.
I mean, we've already seen in Europe the result of disinformation being used at a mass scale, not by a foreign entity, but by internal entities, like it happened in Brexit. And we've seen the results, and we're like, British people are seeing the result of it. So definitely something to look after in 2025, and definitely something that we will talk about again, because we did enjoy making the series about disinformation, and it was more focused in Africa, and it would be really nice to bring it up in different regions with specific examples. So yeah, I would fully agree, something to look into in 2025. What about you, Chris? What do you think?
Well, I think both of those are definitely things we need to watch out for. Some great points. Of course, I'm going to be American-centric.
Whoa.
And
who's going to win the NFL next year?
The Vikings. It's our year, baby.
Ronan, big NFL fan, bigger than me. So I, of course, am looking at Trump coming into power, what that's going to mean for the U.S., what that is going to then mean for U.S. allies around the world, what that's going to mean for the liberal world order that the U.S. and many countries have benefited from, albeit it's not perfect, but it has been beneficial to many countries around the world. I am, like I said earlier, deeply pessimistic and worried. So that's what I'm watching. And then in part also what is going to happen with Elon Musk and all that, because he's talking about funding far-right parties in the UK. Nigel Farage's party, the party name is escaping me. Yesterday, this morning at 1:30, I think, a.m., he was talking about how AfD has to win Germany. So
yeah, Nigel Farage is someone that will clinch to politics until the day they put him in jail, or that he dies of age. Really, the guy was totally out. So yeah, it was.
So big thing for me is Trump, and what all the possibilities that entails.
I mean, I agree. I think it's going to be an interesting time for sure. I would say, I'm much more optimistic. I think, well, for one, it's going to be interesting. There's no doubt about that. This year has been extreme, interesting geopolitically in terms of developments in different regions of the world. And I think that trend is likely to continue.
Yeah.
And I think I know a good quote from a Sydney Swans, my Australian football team podcast. It's like, things are never as good as they seem and things are never as bad as they seem. So depending on which side of the aisle you're sitting. And I think with Trump, there's definitely going to be some shake-up, but the system is more resilient, I think, than we sometimes can see. And there will be the world system, I mean, in that sense. Like, he will definitely change up some things. But I mean, in terms, I think we talked about earlier in the episode, but for instance, with his changes to his push pressure on NATO last time, I think that's a positive change. I think there'll be both negative and positive changes to come out. And to be honest, it's anybody's guess what the hell that would look like. And we'll have to come back in a few years' time.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting in the time that we've started being involved in these matters, how, I don't know if you have that perception, but I have the feeling like everything is speeding up somehow.
I do as well.
And I do have the feeling that it's speeding up, and we don't know the outcome. Like, for as much analysis that you can put, we don't really know the outcome, because I would say there's also an interesting thing going on for good. I fully understand your pessimism, Chris, but I see, for example, attempts of like now with the EU-Mercosur agreement, for example, an attempt to a historical thing that had to happen, having some more closeness between the European Union and South America, having a South America that is more present in the world, having ideas that are flowing and that have been flowing for the last 10, 12 years of human rights, civic rights, and so on, that although there's reactionary governments in many places and they try to push them down, I think that there is a steady development into a more equal societies, at least in the countries that we populate. Although it's steady and it resists its setbacks and everything, but I think we are in a path. And
not all progress is forward, but I
not
would
all
say
progress is that's true.
But I would say we are living in the best time to be alive in human history. If we look objectively, exactly. On averages across the world, obviously that doesn't apply to everyone, but if we're talking about the average human today, lives longer, has a more comfortable life, and I mean, it is easy sometimes to see a lot of negative, but I think there is that
for me about everything is, if we as a species cannot become conscious about the damage that we're doing to the world in itself and its climate and everything, and we don't manage to deal with the consequences beforehand, that would mean a failure as a species. We're going farther from the geopolitical level and coming here to
Musk is going to go to Mars.
Yeah, we'll hang out on Mars. We'll have a colony on Mars.
We can hang out. Okay, like we say, in 25 years, we have the podcast.
Can we send him to Mars now, actually?
No, when 2050, so in the Christmas of 2049, we meet in Mars in a cafe that I hope it's called 30 Seconds Too. 30 Seconds Too. I really want it to be called. I will start it. And with this, we want to wish you Merry Christmas, and also hopefully that in 2025 the year it's interesting, but the year doesn't get us in a worse situation. I don't know.
Maybe not too interesting.
Hopefully your rent is cheaper. We didn't talk about rent prices, for example. This is something that affects all of us. So yeah, I don't know if you guys want to finish with anything, but I want to finish. Thank you, thanking everyone that listens to the podcast, thanking all of you that have been supporting the series that we did on disinformation, now the newsletter that we're releasing, and that genuinely like what we do. And yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully 2025 will be a year full of great success and great happiness for you all.
And some more interesting geopolitical developments.
We will be here.
And we'll be here to guide you through them, as always.
Okay, then thank you very much, Chris, for joining us in this special episode. Hopefully you can join us in 2025. However, you can find Chris every 2 weeks in the newsletter, and he will be right in there. And Ronan, thank you very much for another year.
Another year, thanks.
Second year right now with the Geopolitical
2.5 years. 2.5 years. Time flies. So
time flies.
And thank you everyone for listening. Just to reiterate what Juan said, and have a great Christmas, New Year's, and we'll see you next year for more Geopolitical Pickle.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
The Geopolitical Pickle is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz. Follow us on Instagram at The Geopolitical Pickle or Twitter at The Geopickle for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.